It's all about what people in Utah are, right? People in Utah are good. People in Utah are givers.
That was Devin Thorpe, the co-chair of the Biden-Harris Inauguration National Day of Service Committee, talking to ABC4 News on Tuesday about their successful nonpartisan fundraiser for the Utah Food Bank. Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. As we wrap up this year's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Week, we are looking back on his legacy, and we start with the National Day of Service. Joining us live in studio tonight is the person you just saw, Devin Thorpe. Devin, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a thrill to be here to talk about this.
First off, tell us about the committee that you're a part of. What are the committee's objectives and goals?
So the committee grew out of the Utah for Biden effort, and the goals are really to feed the hungry people in our community, to celebrate and honor Martin Luther King, and to help bring together a divided community.
For you personally, what is the meaning of the annual MLK Day of Service, and how does that play into Dr. King's legacy?
Well, Dr. King said that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? In other words, service and how we take care of other people is the essence, the very embodiment of Martin Luther King's legacy.
Something we should think about every single day. How did the Utah Food Bank get selected to be the beneficiary of the committee's project?
In a word, the pandemic. You see, the pandemic created a huge increase in demand for emergency food. So many more people in Utah are hungry as a result of the pandemic. So it created an interest from us on that side of the ledger. And then on the other side of the ledger, we identified quickly that there was a way for us to help the food bank with some money that wouldn't require us to come together physically. And so the pandemic really defined this project for us.
Tell us about the incentives that drove up the donations, and are you able to share how much money has been raised so far?
Yes, we are so grateful for everyone who donated, whether they donated $5 or $500 or $5,000 or $10,000. But we got the whole effort kicked off with a $10,000 matching grant from Kim and Carolyn Gardner. And then when we reached $25,000, and that first $10,000 matching grant had been exhausted, Patrice Arendt, her husband David Mock, and the Boulder Mountain Lodge contributed another $10,000 matching grant that got us all the way up to $45,000, including the grant. And we have continued raising funds since then and are now just a few dollars short of $60,000.
That's incredible. Now, can the public still donate if they're interested in participating? And if so, how long do they have?
Absolutely they can. It is not too late. We would implore you, just knowing that there continue to be many hungry people in Utah, please visit utahmlkday.com to give now, and we'll keep that page up through the weekend.
Devin, I'd like to give you the last word in this interview. I often think that we as people should not wait one specific day, one specific week, right, to give back. What's your message to those who are watching tonight?
Give now, give today, give generously. The need has never been greater, and it's such a sign of our ability now at this time of great division to come together, to rally around, to honor Martin Luther King, to help our neighbors, and to come together to unify a divided community.
You've been hearing from Devin Thorpe, the co-chair of the Biden-Harris Inauguration National Day of Service Committee. Devin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and joining us to speak about the project. Congratulations on the fundraiser success.
Thank you.
We look at recent events, we know that the fight that Dr. King was engaged in is still a fight in America.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris back on Monday, taking a break from preparations for the inauguration to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with the Day of Service. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. In our last segment, we talked about the National Day of Service. We turn now to Dr. King's impact and the current state of our civil rights movement. Joining us live in studio now is Jeanetta Williams, the president of the NAACP Salt Lake Branch, and Eddy Thompson with the Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Commission. Janetta and Eddy, we look forward to an insightful conversation. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Eddy, this past year was really a big year of racial reckoning. On MLK Jr. Day this year, what went through your mind when you were reflecting and thinking about Dr. King's legacy?
I was thinking about Dr. King's sacrifice and many of our ancestors, their sacrifice, the things that they had to commit to, the fight that they had, the courage that they had, and most importantly, the prayers that not just for them, but prayers for their future generations. So Dr. King, when I think about him, he planted the seeds for our society for many to come. And we're just so thankful for Dr. King. When you look at some of the folks that we have, like Miss Jeanetta, Miss Emma Houston, Miss Representative Sandra Hollins, incredible people who took that dream and are now sharing that with younger folks.
Janetta, our community's work towards racial equality and civil rights have been taking place for a long time. But this past year, we saw a lot of change and action come from after the death of George Floyd. We saw companies, agencies, organizations start to reevaluate how they were approaching discrimination and bias within their own environment. Is it about time that this happened, or is this happening at the right time in history?
I think it is happening at the right time because so many different groups and businesses were looking at ways to address diversity within their companies. But after the killing of George Floyd and they saw the protests, then we had a very large number of businesses step up and say that we're not doing what we could do and we could do better. And then they began to look at their diversity and inclusion programs and wanted to make sure that they had implemented, and they were not only implementing, but they were donating, and they were having more calls and talking to even their family members. We had some of the folks say that, I never realized that these things were happening. And then they talked to their teenage children and their folks, their youth that were in college, and they looked at things much different than they did before the George Floyd. And then they started paying more attention to the number of blacks that were being killed, senseless, the killings across the country. And they started looking at those things a lot different than they had in the past.
Eddy, Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech more than 57 years ago. How close would you say we have gotten in achieving that dream that he spoke about?
I say we've made significant progress in the last 50 or so years. However, as you look, there's still a lot of issues, especially last year with COVID. We saw income gaps, we saw healthcare issues, we saw education gaps, criminal justice gaps. And so there's a lot of work to do just to get to a basic level to even. And so, we're going to continue to work and continue to move in this community.
Janetta, if Dr. King was still alive today, what do you think he would say about the state of civil rights and racial equality in our state and country today?
I think Dr. King would say, I had all of these hopes that this country would be and do so much more. And now I've been gone all these years, and I would be 92 years old this year. Look at where we've come, but then we have so much further to go. I think he would be extremely disappointed at what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Those type of things should never, ever happen in our United States of America. And I think on that part, Dr. King would be extremely disappointed and disgusted, and he would be saying, okay, folks, let's get up, let's keep doing, and where do we go from here? Those are the things that Dr. King would be saying.
Now, Eddy, every year on Dr. King's Day, we see an abundance of people posting all these quotes from Dr. King. It's all over our social media feeds. But preserving Dr. King's legacy should be much more than just reposting his quotes. What types of actions can people take to make a difference in their community?
You're right. You know, I see the posts all the time, but you know, it means nothing if you're not living it. And so I encourage folks to live it. Live those quotes, live the messages, study, understand. I work with the Martin Luther King Commission, and one of the things that we do is we want to make sure we're opening that conversation. And it can be tough, it can be painful, but one of the things we always try to do is to be respectful of each other, to learn from each other, and that's how you can break down those barriers, by communicating with folks that might not be like you, that might be a little different. And so breaking down those barriers is critical.
We are really enjoying this insightful conversation. Janetta and Eddy, hold that thought. We have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our discussion on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy.
In this defining moment for our history and our country, we must answer Dr. King's question. Will our answer be chaos or community?
That was Martin Luther King III, son of Dr. King Jr., back in August at a march against police brutality in Washington, D.C., the same place where his father gave his well-known "I Have a Dream" speech, highlighting a vision of our country without a deep racial divide. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. Before the break, we were joined by Jeanetta Williams, the president of the NAACP Salt Lake Branch, and Eddy Thompson with the Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Commission. We pick up right where we left off. Janetta, we've made progress in the fight for civil rights, but we still have a lot of work to do. In your opinion, what is a quote from Dr. King that we could apply as a guiding principle on moving forward?
I think more so than a quote would be one of the principles, Dr. King's principles, when he said the universe is on the side of justice. And I think what we need to do is realize that the universe is on the side of justice, and for folks to not only celebrate Dr. King holiday on January of every year, but 365 days a year, to make sure that they're looking at how they treat people, how they treat one another, how they treat their neighbors, how they treat their family, their friends, and so, you know, the other folks too. So I think we just have to look at within ourselves to see and make sure that we're doing better and we're doing the things that Dr. King would want us to do, and not just on the holiday, but throughout the year.
Eddy, I'd like to hear from you. Is there a quote or principle that you think we could use as we're moving forward?
I like the quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only love can do that." And you know, Dr. King, his message resounds not just to black people, but to all people. That's what we should all aspire to do, and to love each other, to find common ground as best we can, and that's how you get to understanding.
Eddy, I'd like to talk about complicity. One quote from Dr. King is, quote, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." How applicable is this quote in a time like now?
You know, you could look back at last year at the George Floyd handling, and you had several cops there that sat there and they did nothing. As one of the cops was killing a person in broad daylight. It's like a bully. If you don't stand up to a bully, the bully will continue to do what they do. And so when people start to say, this is not acceptable, we're not going to take this anymore, and they speak up and they come together, that's when you can get change.
Janetta, there's a lot that's happened in the past year in Salt Lake City and Utah alone. How do you feel about the direction that our state is going when it comes to addressing issues about racial inequality?
I think the state is doing a lot better. They are looking at different things. Of course, Governor Herbert called together a group of folks, and we met with him on several different occasions. You know, he put together the COVID task force to make sure that they were looking at the number of people of color that didn't have medical care that were tested positive. they were looking at more businesses that are really addressing race and race relations more so now than it has in the past. And some people may think that maybe Utah is not doing everything that they can, but I think they're making an attempt to try to do more. And we're seeing and working with police reform. You know, there have been groups that the governor put together where we were meeting roughly about every 2 weeks. And I think those meetings were very beneficial, not only for police officers, but for the community and also for legislators. Because of those meetings that we were holding, there's a number of bills that the legislators will be presenting. And so we're hoping that people will look at those bills and support the legislators in our efforts, because not only did the legislators work together on these, but the community and law enforcement did as well. So we're hoping that they would support those.
Well, on that note, I'd like to end the conversation positively. Janetta, kind of building off what you were just saying, what are some of the successes that we've had in the past year? One in particular that I can think of is the amazing voter turnout among minority communities this election cycle. Are there any others that you can think of?
Well, the voter turnout was extremely beneficial because, of course, in NAACP we're nonpartisan, but we had a huge effort in trying to get out the vote. And then we also worked with the census and making sure that everybody was counted. So we've looked at a lot of different areas, but I think for the most part, voter turnout was massive. We've had a huge number, not only here in Utah, but across the country. And it's because of the work of folks in the community working together. And so it wasn't just the NAACP, but we had a lot of other groups and organizations working with us.
Eddy, let's squeeze you in real quick before we have to wrap up. What's a success or victory that you think we can take away from this past year?
Two quick things. I think, we saw a lot more determination and a lot more folks getting involved in the political discussion in the political system, making sure that they vote and understood what they needed to do. And, personally, I saw a lot more white people stepping up and speaking out. In some cases, they were more outraged than I was, calling out the hypocrisy of things. So it's good to have advocates, folks that are speaking out, that are getting their kids involved, saying we're not going to take this anymore.
And it's also good to have allies as well. All right, you've been hearing from Janetta Williams, the president of the NAACP Salt Lake Branch, and Eddy Thompson with the Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Commission. Thank you both for being on the show tonight to share your insightful thoughts. And before we let you go, we'd like to just wish Janetta a happy birthday. We realize today is your special day, and it means so much for you to spend tonight with us. Happy birthday, Janetta.
Well, thank you. That was a surprise.
Yeah.